My name is Elon Osborne, and I like to talk...
Are you sure?
My name is Elon Osborne, and I like to talk about movies, audio, and music. And I'm on a mission. A mission to find an affordable setup for those of you wanting to get into home theater on an extremely tight budget. But not just any home theater. A baseline which can then expand into a full surround sound setup, whether that be 5.1, 7.1, 5.1.2, or even a monster 7.2.4 Dolby Atmos configuration someday. We all gotta start somewhere though, and this might cause some of you to raise your proverbial pitchforks and come after me with outrage, but I'm not talking about soundbars.
Sorry, not sorry.
Soundbars are great for what they are, but once you want to move on or upgrade or expand, normally you can't with soundbars. You have to buy a completely new system rather than being able to swap out or upgrade certain components when you see fit. But you don't have to rush out and get a complete 5.1 system with an AV receiver to enhance your crappy TV speakers. If your budget is very limited, there is no shame starting with a 2.1 system, meaning 2 bookshelf speakers, maybe some stands to set them on if need be, and a subwoofer. So I was doing some research online about where to start, and I came across the small niche within home audio, the mini Bluetooth DAC/amp. There are several on Amazon, come to find out, but what whittled down the options significantly was that I needed to have a subwoofer out port. You can get away with a 2.0 system, sure, but to truly make it a home theater experience, having a subwoofer was essential in this equation to really reach down to those cinematic rumbling frequencies that most bookshelf speakers just aren't capable of. That and the other qualification on this quest of mine is that it needed to have an optical input so you could plug your TV straight into it. What caught my eye first was this little guy from Fosi Audio, the DA2120C. I can easily hold it in one hand given its weight and compact size. The power button and input selection button on the front aren't the best quality when you touch them, but it has a nice little LED screen with a large volume knob on the right. Overall, the build quality of the chassis is solid. And coming in under $200, I was impressed with the amount of inputs there are on the back. Bluetooth antenna, USB to plug in your PC, optical for your TV, coax to plug in a DVD or CD player, sub out, and speaker terminals which support banana plugs, which is a very nice plus. Just as an aside, I can't stand it when a company skimps on speaker terminals and only provides cheap spring clips that you have to stick bare wire through. I'm looking at you, Klipsch, with the 5.1 reference theater pack or 5.1.4 cinema system. Would it really have cost that much more to put 5-way binding posts on there instead? Come on. Anywho, the DA2120C even comes with a handy little remote, which allows you to easily switch inputs, reduce or boost treble or bass, switch between EQ presets like country, heavy rock, jazz, light rock, rap, or normal. And of course, you can raise and lower the volume. With the DA2120C as the focal point, I hooked up a 2.1 system featuring the Sub 800 from Dayton Audio, which I will also be reviewing soon, and connected the Veris 3 Grand V5B bookshelf speakers from Aperion Audio. Oh, and last thing I did during the setup was change the audio output on my TV to PCM. This little amp cannot decode Dolby signals, which, silly me, I should have accounted for prior to me turning on the TV, because the sound that came out of the speakers when I tried to stream a movie? Horrible. Like this static hiss mixed with this rapid-fire rhythmic thumping simultaneously. I know, pretty bonehead move on my part since I didn't switch it to PCM before turning on the TV and starting to watch a movie. Learn from my mistakes, people. Also, connecting my phone to it via Bluetooth worked just fine. No weird glitches or anything, just connected to it like any other Bluetooth speaker or device from my settings app. Boom. How do they sound? Even after I did switch the TV audio to PCM, right out the gate, it sounded bad. Very muddy with too much bass, especially with dialogue in movies and TV shows. Didn't matter who was talking, they all had this low frequency energy riding along with every word they said.
Well, I don't like that.
So I turned off the subwoofer just so I could do some active listening to the bookshelf speakers alone. I messed with the EQ presets first, and honestly, I didn't really like the result of any of them. So I switched it back to the normal EQ preset, then proceeded to turn the bass down, turn the treble up, then after some back and forth, I finally got it to a place that was more natural sounding. Now, these V5B bookshelf speakers are incredible, so the fact that out of the box this DAC made them sound muddy was a little disappointing. But once I got the system dialed in, also turning the subwoofer back on and subtly bringing that back into the mix, it sounded great. There's something to be said about having speakers on either side of the TV and having that phantom center as opposed to being constrained to the dimensions of soundbar placed below the TV. Because those moments when sound effects or dialogue happens off screen, it's a much better effect, I think, since it's literally happening outside of the dimensions of the TV. Last week, my girls decided they wanted to watch Pirates of the Caribbean since they had never seen it before. Little did they know there are 5 movies to go through. So over the weekend, we got through number 1 and 2 and about halfway through number 3. Up until this point, in this living room, there's been a Sonos Beam with some Sonos surrounds as our main setup, which sounded fine for what it's worth. But man, even without surrounds, I just prefer the sound of some good old-fashioned bookshelf speakers paired with a sub. We're dealing with 5¼ woofers and a 1-inch tweeter on the V5Bs. The closest you'll get to the sheer size of woofers like that is the Sennheiser Ambio, which has an array of 4-inch woofers. Now, obviously you can hear sound coming from a soundbar, but the way that sound works is that something vibrates. That vibrating releases energy in the form of waves that hit air molecules, causing a cascade of molecular collisions traveling outward that eventually hit our ears, travel to our eardrums, which is then interpreted by our brains. And the difference between a 3-inch woofer compared to a 5¼ woofer is significant. It's able to push more molecules towards your head, resulting in fuller, more rounded, more natural sounds. You may or may not remember this statement I made in my recent review of the Sony HT-A3000 soundbar system. But before I move on, I would like to mention that with the soundbar alone, it does sound like a soundbar. Yeah, I've reviewed enough soundbars that they just have a specific sound to me now. But don't get me wrong, I completely understand that depending on your situation, sometimes soundbars are just the way to go. They're a perfect fit for your lifestyle, location, or frankly, bank account. So I will continue to review soundbars whenever I get the chance, and I will continue to post about sales of soundbars on my community page because I know they are just right for many of you out there. But if this little $179 DAC, which is rated to handle up to 120 watts per channel in a 4-ohm load, can push bigger, fuller, and more cinematic audio through whatever bookshelf speakers I want, I'm obviously going to prefer that over a complete surround soundbar system with little woofers trying their hardest to push those molecules towards my ears. The science speaks for itself, baby!
Recap.
Of course, there are some cons to this little guy, like the fact that most Bluetooth DACs only support optical from the TV and not HDMI. Without optical, there's no way to utilize CEC commands, so you're forced to also use the remote that comes with it just to change the volume. I know that sounds super lazy, but you know, everything is relative, and when you're used to using one remote to do it all, it is a bit weird to have to go back to using multiple remotes. Also, when I dialed in the EQ as best I could, it still wasn't exactly where I wanted it in the end. The sound was big, but not as detailed as I'd like it. The LED screen is very small, so the only thing that's big enough to read from my couch is the volume. If I have to switch inputs, I have to do so somewhat near the unit so I can see which input it is. So I think this particular DAC might be primarily a unit for an office, connected to a PC perhaps. On another note, sometimes I just wouldn't get any sound out of the system, so I would have to power cycle everything and start again. Although, sometimes that also happens with my Sonos Beam, so maybe it's more of an issue with my TV. Stereo imaging was okay, but the phantom center immediately goes away when you're not sitting directly in between the two speakers. But for what it's worth, I was impressed with what this little thing could do. Both movies and music sounded large. The number of inputs is also impressive while still leaving enough room for a subwoofer out. So, for this being the first test on my quest for a great inexpensive 2.1 system, I will give it a score of pretty good. I still prefer this type of sound over a soundbar, especially since this gives me the freedom to choose my speakers and whatever subwoofer I want, within reason, since 120 watts into 4 ohms is great for something this size. So I'm excited to see what's next on this journey.
And there you have it.
Thank you for joining me on this review of the DA2120C DAC from Fosi Audio. Are you rocking a 2.1 setup somewhere, whether that be your primary or secondary office setup? Have you dealt with a mini Bluetooth DAC before? Would you now consider starting with a 2.1 system and growing that into an eventual surround sound system? Let's start a conversation, people! As always, please be kind to each other out there. Don't just watch TV and movies, experience them. And of course, always be listening. Hey! My name is Elon Olivorn. And that's my dog Maddie. Get out of here if you're gonna do that. This is terrible for the audio. If you need to defend this house, go outside and do it. Unnecessary.